Good morning or afternoon, always depending on where you're listening in from. Welcome everyone to today's live cast, which is also our last live cast of this series. It's absolutely crazy to believe that we're already 8 weeks from when we started this. So thank you everyone for joining. My name is Molly Pracht, and I have had the amazing opportunity to be your host every single week, as I have been joined by Aduro coaches over the last 8 weeks as we have touched on really in-depth topics and different areas of life that we are all going through right now. So for those of you that are joining us for the very first time on our very last session of the series, or maybe you're a bit unfamiliar with Aduro, Aduro is a human performance company that is existing at the intersection of well-being and performance. And so among many things, we provide expert coaching and interactive content to really build company culture and build the social connections that are so necessary, especially in these days, and really promote the growth for all people. And so being our last live cast of the series, it's hard for me today. I've loved this project, and I've loved being here with you every single week for the last 8 Thursdays. And I was thinking about it this morning on my way in, and I was remembering how excited I was before we even started the first session with Coach Jansen, how excited I was to actually get to this point in this project and get to this point to where I would be able to take a step back and just appreciate the experience of being here with all of you every single week. However, today, and especially this last week, like most of you, it's been a little difficult. It's been a little tough the last few weeks, but especially this last week. And I have felt utterly overwhelmed and, to be honest, a complete sense of helplessness given the events that are happening around the world. And if we think about it, we're continuing to heal and rebuild from a global pandemic. And that has rocked so many of us for so many weeks, so many months to our core. We've been talking about that for the last 8 weeks, it feels like. And now we are provided with this pivotal moment in a long history of systemic racism and inequality and injustice. And as I sit here with you all today, and I feel like I've come to know so many of you just from the chat feature over the last couple of weeks, I'm not even gonna try to come across like I know how to help, or I know how to help or support whatever you're feeling right now, or really cover up the fact that, like many of us, my unintentionality of being silent has possibly contributed to the problem that we've had for a long time. And so with that, I want to acknowledge that we can't go into the necessary depth in the way that we want to, the way that we need to today because of time, but we are going to attempt to start the conversation and really focus on an area that we all can start with, which is our own self-care. And so my guest for today could not be more fitting as we sit here today, and as we need the support, as we all need the support right now, as we begin to roll up our sleeves and really put into action all the work that we have talked about over the last couple of weeks. I am very grateful to introduce Amy Holan, one of Aduro's behavioral health coaches, who is also a licensed mental health professional, along with a licensed marriage and family therapist. So Amy, thank you for being here, and welcome to the last show.
Thank you, Molly. I feel super honored to be here on your last show.
Yes. So Amy, I know that you don't necessarily have all the answers either. No, nor do any of us really. But as we all sit here and we all are listening in, what do you feel is the best way that we can start just to navigate these feelings that are coming up for us all right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I don't have the answers. I do know that in my world of working with feelings, I have certainly been really concentrating on the feelings that are coming up for me that I can only imagine are coming up for other people as well. And obviously my feelings are going to be different than the feelings of the Black community who've been facing this every day. And this isn't necessarily something new. I think the thing that is new right now is that people are really listening and the conversation is changing. But when I think about my feelings that are coming up as a white woman, recognizing my own contribution, I think you said it beautifully, of like, I just unintentionally have stayed silent in a way that maybe contributed to the complacency that our culture has been contributing to this issue. And so I know the feelings that I'm experiencing include shame and helplessness and hopelessness. And I know about feelings enough to know that if I bury those feelings, if I bury the feelings of shame that I'm experiencing, then I run the risk of those feelings coming up in really strange and unexpected ways. Does that make sense? I feel like, if I put shame and I just bury it down a little bit further, the helplessness further and further and further, then I'm not really addressing the problem. I'm not really working through the problem. I'm just suppressing it. And then that will come up in ways that I don't want them to.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of our first session with Coach Jansen, and we talked a lot about the art of naming how you're feeling and getting specific with it, and not necessarily generalizing it to good or bad or angry or sad, but really tapping into what that feels like in your head and emotionally, and also in your body. It sounds right in line.
Yeah. And I think that's so powerful, right? Jansen said something to me actually, I think last week, where it's like, that we shouldn't feel not that we shouldn't feel the shame, but that we should recognize that the shame is really just voicing what's happening for us. And it's a clue of when we need to tap in a little bit deeper. And I think that's so powerful to really look at that as a clue as to what's happening for us. And it may come up in weird ways. It may not feel like shame initially. It could come up as defensiveness. It could come up as frustration or irritability, or just wanting this whole thing to pass and be over. And it makes sense that we could potentially have those feelings as well, because it's uncomfortable. We're really in a place of discomfort, but I think it's so powerful too, because in that discomfort, that's where the growth happens. That's where the change happens. And so really leaning into it rather than leaning away from it. And that's how we're going to really be able to show up and really be able to help enact change.
Absolutely. And so in terms of, I can speak from my experience, which is just exactly like yours. You have the shame, the guilt, and the overwhelm of, this isn't just in this last week. This has been happening for so long, longer than our parent, right? Like, just so long. And it feels overwhelming to think about, like, well, how do you take a first step in terms of acknowledging and doing something about these really tough feelings when you are up against history of this? Right? Like, how do you even start to navigate how uncomfortable it feels as, as a white woman, as a, with white privilege, when you want to do so much, you don't even know where to go. So navigating that feeling, and like, what is the first step in moving from acknowledging and being aware of the realness of that?
I think that the first step in allyship and how we can stand up and be allies to the Black community right now is to really, not shut down, but to really open our ears and listen to the experience and empathize with their experience, their lived experience. And I think that the more that we are open to learning and exploring and getting really curious, then the more opportunity we are going to have to create ripple effects of change, and really opening the dialogue to have some really uncomfortable conversations and being okay with that. I'm not saying it's going to be comfortable. It shouldn't be comfortable. That's how change happens. That's how change happens within ourselves. And that's how change happens systemically. Brene Brown posted this really great post that, the system isn't broken. The system was built this way. And I think that's really important to remember, is like, we need to get really empathetic with the lived experience of the Black community so that we can really create a ripple effect of, like, we're really leaning into that change for ourselves. We're really willing to grow. We're really willing to get curious and have uncomfortable conversations. Then we're going to create a ripple effect in our communities, in the people, with the people that we love and that we're close to, and also, with ourselves. I mean, we're going to really create that ripple effect in our world, and that's how change happens.
Mm. When a couple of weeks ago, when we were talking about this session, and you have always been an avid proponent of self-care, and self-care in a way that is so different than we actually think about, like, oh, self-care, I'm going to go get a massage, or maybe I'll go shopping, or maybe I'll go play golf, or whatever your kind of form of it that instantly comes to your mind is, but really diving into self-care. And I feel like self-care is one of those areas that we all know is important, and we recognize the overarching importance of it. It's very similar to, like, I know I need to eat well, I know I need to exercise, I know I need to have self-care, but for some reason, we know we should be doing it. And it's one of those areas that, especially during this time, is really low on a lot of our priority lists, right? Mm-hmm. And so, as such an advocate and a teacher of self-care, why is this in such dire necessity to change it and move it up on the priority list to the top, essentially?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it is so critical that we take care of ourselves so we can take care of others. That is the core of how we can show up in meaningful ways for our kids, for our families, and for our community. And especially right now, this is no different. We need to take care of ourselves so we can take care of others. And maybe that self-care looks a little different right now too. I mean, yeah, we're all still, there's a lot of us that are still in lockdown. There are some communities that are opening up, and that changes the way that we've done things that may have been our self-care go-tos in the past. But I think there's other ways to enhance our self-care. And when we're looking at self-care, I think immediately what my mind goes to is physical. Like, I got to get out and get some exercise, or I need to go get a massage. I think about the physical piece, but I don't necessarily go to the automatic thing about looking at my emotional self-care or my professional self-care. And there's all of these different quadrants or buckets, if you will, of self-care that we need to fill up. And right now it's so critical, because if we put our air mask on, our oxygen mask on, when you're on a plane, they tell you to put your oxygen mask on before your kids, which feels like super backwards, right? But the goal there is, because then if you're there to take care of yourself, you're alive, you can help your kid, you can help the people around you. And the same thing goes right now. We need to put our oxygen masks on while also assisting others. And so really looking at self-care at the different quadrants of self-care. There's the physical aspect, and that could be, exercise. Sure, everybody goes to exercise, yoga, things like that. But there's other things that to consider with self-care for physical as well, which include, making sure you're getting medical care, making sure that you're eating healthy, making sure that you're getting enough sleep. I mean, these are all things that can really nurture that physical self-care. The psychological self-care is probably one of the most critical right now. We have so much happening as far as, social media and news, and we should all be paying attention. It's not that we should just shut it all off or shut it all down, but maybe it means taking a break and then coming back to it, taking some deep breaths and just really experiencing it, but also feeling like it's okay to just take a breather for a little bit. maybe taking your exposure to what's happening right now, and you're seeing it on social media, and taking that to your journal and journaling about it. That's a really good form of psychological self-care. Getting outside, maybe getting a little sun on your face, that can be a really good form of psychological self-care. So really looking at how do you get physical, psychological, emotional self-care. Emotional self-care can be something as much as crying. Crying is so therapeutic for you emotionally, and feeling like that's okay. I know I've been doing a ton of crying this week. Anyone who's been in meetings with me can attribute to that. I just feel very emotional, but also allowing yourself that self-compassion, that it's okay that you're in that moment and you're having that moment, and just that's a great form. That self-compassion is also a really great form of emotional self-care. And then there's spiritual self-care, which doesn't necessarily mean going to church or tuning into any specific religious institution. It could also mean something as simple as meditating, or going for a walk outside in nature, or listening to the birds. There's lots of different ways that you can tap into that spiritual self-care. And then there's the personal self-care, which is that reflection on who you are, and maybe even turning into your journal about that. Like, who are you? Figuring out, and this is such an important time to do that, right? To figure out where things are coming from, what things come up for you as you're hearing about everything that's going on. If you are feeling frustrated, like, where is that coming from? Get really curious with yourself and try to have a better understanding of where that is happening inside of you. Of course, we know that the personal self-care is like connecting with friends and family. That's also super important. But you know what? Maybe it's, posting something on social media that feels like activism to you, or maybe it is going to a peaceful protest. And that could be also a form of self-care as well. And then professional, like really allowing yourself, boundaries, really trying to establish what work time is versus home time is, and really just trying to create those boundaries so you can have some more professional self-care. So those are just a few of the different elements of self-care. And you can always you can Google self-care wheel and you will find this all over the internet. There's tons of them. But it is a nice way to really tap into that self-care, especially right now. And then I also just want to say that, this is going to be clunky. And this is going to be uncomfortable. Like, this is part of this process that we are all going through. Everyone. It's going to be uncomfortable, and that's okay. Like, we have to be okay in that discomfort and lean into it, because that's how the change is going to happen. And we're going to make mistakes, and that's okay too. Really giving yourself that leeway and that freedom to make some mistakes, because then you can circle back around and acknowledge it, and you can repair with the people that mean something to you and mean the most to you.
Yeah. In that regard, you mentioned self-compassion inside of a lot of those, the latter buckets of the wheel, like you were talking about, and the personal and the emotional and the spiritual and the psychological. And I feel like those are so important. And I appreciate, Amy, that you kind of call those out, because oftentimes, at least for me, I don't really necessarily think about the little opportunities that you have for self-care in all of the different areas that you just mentioned, right? It's typically when we think about self-care, or think for everybody on the line, like when someone asks you, oh, what do you do for your own self-care? Typically you go to like the one or two, key things that you've done or you think that you should be doing, for so long. Oh, well, I go for a walk, or I exercise, or I walk my dog, or, I go to happy hour with a friend, or whatever it may be. But really thinking about, when we think about expanding or diving into the necessity of this, which is what you mentioned really, really well, is there are so many opportunities for us to dive into self in all of those different buckets that you mentioned, and just do one or two tiny little things inside of all those areas, or choosing one area to start with, that can be so pivotal when we are looking at navigating through the feelings, right? That we talked about earlier, the feelings that we're feeling, and how do we take one step? If you're unsure of that one step forward, and I love how you mentioned listen. So many of us, the first step could really be listening. Don't try to fix, don't try to solve, just listen. And I think for me, being able to identify something tangible in terms of like what area of my wheel, of my self-care wheel, could I actually take advantage of today, this weekend, and really building up my tools inside of that whole perspective, that whole wheel. And the self-compassion piece I think is important, especially, as we look at mental health and, the wide spectrum of mental health and how we all have mental health. Like mental health isn't just for some people and just for not. Like being human means that you have physical health, spiritual health, mental health, right? Like it's all encompassing. And so I think reminding ourselves that it's going to be clunky, it's going to be uncomfortable. We can have grace with ourselves. We can be self-compassionate as we navigate through these feelings that then turn into emotions that sometimes can be pretty heavy or scary even, right?
Oh yeah. This is unprecedented as far as, the quarantine goes and everything that's happening with that. And then with everything that's happening with Black Lives Matter and the Black community, I feel like it's going to be scary for a lot of people because it's a big change, and change is always scary. And really recognizing that, we have an opportunity here to really support people. And in supporting others, we always have to consider our mental health. And I love what you said is like, we all have mental health. Absolutely. I mean, our mental health is integral to who we are, right? It is the foundation that we all stand on. And if we don't have it, or if we aren't nurturing it or not taking care of it, that foundation just slips out from underneath us. And then we can't be there for others. So how do we get ahead of it? How do we get ahead of nurturing our mental health so that when we are, out there advocating and supporting others and really trying to create change, and it feels uncomfortable and it feels clunky, then we're still standing on our own 2 feet because we've been doing the work of self-care to help prepare us for that moment.
Yeah. And I remember, a couple of days ago thinking about this and tapping into my own feelings, my own awareness. And when I think about being able to shut it off, cut it out, and, kind of focus and dive into my own world. When I think about prioritizing my self-care, I'll be honest, it feels a little bit painful and selfish and privileged to be able to do that right now with everything that is happening. But I know there's also another side to that too, right? It's not selfish. It's not, yes, it may be privileged to be able to shut it off because not everybody can just shut this off. This isn't an area that comes and goes for so many people in our community. But just tapping into the feelings of what may be prohibiting somebody from tapping into themselves or doing something for themselves that may be conflicted with that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good point. It is a place of privilege, right? That we all have, that we are, that especially the white community has, which is there's this place of privilege that we can just go and take a walk outside and not really think about our safety. I mean, that is a different thing for us. And so to really acknowledge that and understand that, but self-care isn't just for one community versus another, it's for everybody. And it's particularly important for the Black community right now for that self-care as well, because there's just so much happening. And also recognizing that, this is happening all the time, right? I mean, this isn't something that's particularly new. This is something that they've been experiencing their whole lives. And now the conversation is changing and the dialogue is changing, and we're all engaging in that in a really meaningful way. And I think that's really the piece of hope that I hold, is that we're all really engaging, which is lovely. And I recognize that, it's going to be tough for other people too. I mean, I know it's tough for me too, to know exactly what to do or exactly what to say and how to be supportive of my community, my friends, and, feeling okay about, making these little slip ups where we're like, oh, that wasn't exactly how I wanted to say that, or that wasn't exactly how I wanted to be in that moment. And also being able to acknowledge it and not get defensive about it and not project our anxiety onto the people around us. And how we do that is by really, checking in with ourselves. Now, I'm not suggesting that everybody just spend all day at home, doing face masks and like bubble baths. Like I'm just talking about like, hey, what are some things that you can do just in the moment that's just really core to who you are, that feeds your soul? Because the more that we feed our soul, and then the more that we are going to be able to, give back to others. And that's, I mean, it just is so important. And maybe that's reading, every morning I get up in the morning and I have my coffee. I get up an hour ahead of my husband, so I have a little bit of alone time. And I read a book that's meaningful to me. And, really taking notes and being, journaling. And it's just my time. It's my time to really reflect and wake up gradually. And that's really important to me. And it's important to my mental health. And that's not me going out and getting massages or going out and getting a mani-pedi, which I also love and condone. But I also recognize that that's just a very core fundamental thing that feeds my soul, that I do every day, that I do for me. And it's a very powerful thing.
I also want to remind everyone, for those of you that have been here even the last couple of weeks, maybe not all 8 weeks, but the last couple of weeks, like every session we've been talking about, about this and about tapping into self for in some degree, right? In some way with every single one of our coaches. And so I encourage you all to think back and tap into some of the things that you've wrote down and the exercises that we've done and some of the things that you have become aware of from our previous sessions, and utilize that noticing and that learning of self as you move forward from today and from today's conversation. Thank you, Amy. And as we move on and as we're winding down time here, I wanted to take the opportunity just to again say thank you. Thank you to everyone that's shown up every single Thursday with me. And if you haven't been here the whole time, thank you for just coming today. And I want to also thank all of our coaches that have been on here with me. And I hope that you have enjoyed getting to know us, getting to meet us, getting to see us, as we have loved being here and supporting you. And so I greatly appreciate this space. Amy, thank you for having this conversation with me today, a serious conversation that needs to happen. It needs to continue to happen. And I'm grateful to have it wrap up our series. So thank you. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Molly. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And so as we wind down, this is so hard. I don't know how to encourage you to join me for next Thursday, because there won't be a next Thursday right now. But I want to remind everyone that tomorrow you will be getting your follow-up email. It will have a blog post in there with all of our videos from all of our sessions. And I encourage you to rewatch the ones that you absolutely loved, or share them with your community, with those people that may be struggling right now, may be having a difficult time identifying their own feelings, their own emotions, as from the pandemic, and as we're moving forward with everything that's been going on this week. Utilize what you've learned about yourself to support your communities, and share those videos, and please provide the feedback to us, because we've absolutely loved this project and being here with you over the last 8 weeks. And so we're going to take a little bit of a break from our live cast. We will be looking to start them up towards the end of June. You will all be notified on there. If you've registered for this, we will notify you, and we will continue to communicate the new series of live casts around here. Again, thank you so much for joining me every single week. Thank you from all of our coaches that have been on here. We wish you the best. We wish you peace. We wish you courage. And we are excited to connect with you again in a little bit. So thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Have a great day.